Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind, and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into something very close and very mysterious. The simple, impossible fact that you are aware. Our theme is the quantum roots of human awareness, but before we drift anywhere near quantum physics, we will stay for a while with a gentler question. What is it like to be you? Before you settle in too deeply, I'd love, if you feel comfortable, for you to take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly enjoy these calm explorations. And when you're ready, you can leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It is always quietly wonderful to imagine people scattered across cities and countrysides, each in their own little corner of time, listening together in the soft hours of the day or night. Now feel free to dim the lights, maybe let a small fan hum in the background, or pull a blanket a little closer. If your eyes are getting heavy, you can let them close. You do not need to watch the screen, you can simply listen. If your mind wanders, that is perfectly fine. You do not have to hold on to every detail. The story will go on without demanding anything from you. As you lie there or sit there, notice a few small things around you. Perhaps there is the weight of the pillow under your head, or the feeling of a mattress gently pushing back against your body. Maybe there is a faint sound in the distance, a car passing, a clock ticking, the murmur of a refrigerator, or the soft breathing of someone else in the room. There might be a hint of warmth on your skin, or the coolness of the air against your face. All of this is quietly flowing into you. Your eyes, if they are open, gather light. Your ears collect vibrations in the air. Your skin registers pressure and temperature. Inside your nose and mouth, tiny chemical traces become smells and tastes. Somewhere, deep in the folds of your brain, all of this becomes a single scene, a single moment. And at the center of it, there is something that cannot quite be pointed to. The feeling that you are the one experiencing it. You might think of consciousness as that simple but remarkable fact that there is someone home in this body. You're not just a collection of cells and signals. There is something it is like to be you. There is a taste to your memories, a color to your moods, a texture to your thoughts. A cup of tea at the end of a long day does not only warm your hands, it also settles into your awareness with a quiet sense of comfort or relief. A song does not just produce patterns of sound, it carries emotion, nostalgia, images you cannot fully explain. Science has become very good at describing what your brain is doing when all this happens. We can talk about neurons firing, networks activating, chemicals releasing. We can match certain patterns in the brain to particular experiences. This region lights up when you see faces, that region responds to music, another region helps you move your hand. These are all real and important findings. They tell us a great deal about the machinery of the mind. But there is a question that still sits just out of reach. If you imagine the brain from the outside as a kind of living electrical storm, you can see signals racing along pathways, clouds of activity forming and dissolving. You might imagine shrinking down and walking among the cells like a traveller in a strange city, listening to crackling messages pass from one neuron to another. Even if you understood every single signal, every connection, you would still be watching from the outside. The puzzle is this: how does all of that activity become a world seen from the inside? How does a pattern of electrical and chemical events turn into the redness of red, the sharpness of pain, the warmth of love, the ache of sadness, or the simple awareness of I am here, right now? You can know where in the brain things happen. You can measure how strong the signals are, but none of that quite captures what the experience feels like. Philosophers sometimes call this the hard problem of consciousness, but we do not need the label to feel its weight. Imagine a robot that could imitate everything you do. It could answer questions, move its hands, imitate your voice, even show expressions that look like joy or worry. If you open the robot's head, You would find circuits and wires, not neurons. The question is not whether the robot behaves intelligently. The harder question is whether there is anything it is like to be that robot. Is there an inner light there, or only a very convincing performance? The same question, in a softer way, can be turned back to us. If you look at the brain as a physical object, you see tangled tissue, cells full of proteins, ions drifting in and out. It is all chemistry and electricity. And yet, when this particular structure is active, there is suddenly a sky, and memories, and the sound of your own name, and the feeling of lying here listening to someone talk about awareness. We can say that consciousness emerges from brain activity, meaning that it arises when many simple parts work together. That is a useful word. But it does not yet tell us how it actually feels from the inside, or why it should feel like anything at all. If this begins to feel abstract, you can let the details blur and simply rest with the simple observation that you are aware of this moment. Perhaps your breathing has slowed a little. You might notice the gentle rise and fall of your chest. You might feel your attention drift to your eyelids, to the weight of your hands, to one small sound in the room. All of that is appearing inside a kind of inner space that you never see directly, yet you live in it all the time. For more than a century, scientists have tried to explain this inner space in many ways. Some see it as nothing more than the brain's way of monitoring itself. Some suggest it comes from patterns of information integrated across many regions at once. Others argue that consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe, something like space or time, present in some faint form wherever there is matter and energy. None of these ideas has fully settled the matter. The mystery remains. In the rest of our journey, we will explore one particularly intriguing possibility, that the roots of awareness might reach down into the strange rules that govern the tiniest pieces of reality, the rules of the quantum world. We will go there slowly. First, we will understand how the brain is usually described, how neurons talk to one another, how signals move and combine. Only then will we begin to ask whether something deeper, quieter, and more delicate might be happening beneath that familiar picture. For now, you do not need to solve anything. It is enough to notice that in this quiet moment, a warm, living brain is resting in the dark, and inside it a soft stream of experience continues. Thoughts drift by, sensations rise and fade, and somewhere at the centre of it all there is the simple feeling, I am here. That feeling is the starting point for everything that follows. If you're still awake, or drifting somewhere in that quiet space between awareness and sleep, we can gently step a little deeper into the world inside your head. Not the mysterious world of quantum possibilities just yet, but the more familiar landscape scientists have studied for over a century, the classical brain. This is the picture most of neuroscience uses today, the one built from cells, signals, and electrical sparks. Even if it does not fully explain why you feel the way you do, it offers a remarkably rich description of how thoughts and sensations travel through your mind. And exploring it slowly, without any rush, can help us understand why many researchers believe something deeper might still be missing. Imagine for a moment that your brain is a vast city glowing at night. From far away, you would see billions of tiny lights flickering on and off, each one representing a neuron coming to life for a brief moment. These are the brain's basic units, small, branching cells shaped a little like trees mixed with wires. You have roughly 80 to 100 billion of them, depending on how you count, and each one can form thousands of connections. If you picture every neuron as a house in that nighttime city, the streets would stretch farther than any map could hold. Every direction you look, a new neighbourhood. Every moment, countless windows lighting up and darkening again. Now imagine shrinking down into one of those little houses. Inside, signals move not with footsteps, but with tiny changes in electrical charge. You don't need to think of volts or equations here. Just imagine the way a spark of static electricity jumps from your finger to a doorknob on a dry day. a neuron creates something like a tiny, gentler version of that spark, sending it along its long branch, which can stretch surprisingly far through the brain's tangled architecture. When this spark reaches the end of the neuron, it does not simply leap into the next cell. Instead, it arrives at a gap so small it almost doesn't seem real, a microscopic space called a synapse. Across this tiny gap, the brain uses chemicals instead of electricity. They are little messengers, packets released by one neuron and caught by the next. You can imagine them like small paper notes passed across a narrow alley between two windows. When the receiving neuron collects enough of these notes, it decides whether to send its own spark forward, continuing the message along the network. This is how your brain handles everything from lifting your hand to remembering a smell from childhood. It is a ceaseless conversation, billions of voices whispering to each other all at once. Some scientists describe this constant activity as an orchestra, with each neuron playing its own brief note. But unlike a classical orchestra, there is no single conductor. Instead, patterns form as millions of tiny actions add up. This is where the idea of emergence enters the picture. Something simple happening at a small scale can, when repeated many times over, give rise to something far more complex. You've seen this idea in nature many times. A single bird flying in the sky is simple. 1,000 birds moving in a flock, weaving through the air in perfect unison, is something else entirely. No leader is shouting instructions. Instead, each bird follows simple rules, and the miracle happens on its own. The brain may be similar. A single neuron can only send a spark or remain quiet, but when billions interact, a symphony appears. Thoughts come and go. Memories gather and fade. You understand language. You recognize faces. All of these emerge not because any one neuron knows how to do them, but because so many simple parts work together. Modern theories of consciousness rely heavily on this idea. One suggests that your mind works like a theatre. Most activity happens backstage, hidden from awareness. But when certain information becomes important, it is projected into a kind of mental spotlight, where many different regions of the brain can access it at once. This spotlight is where conscious experience lives. You don't need to imagine beams of light or curtains, only the sense that certain thoughts feel present, as if placed on a stage, while countless others remain in the dark. Another view suggests that consciousness arises when information inside the brain becomes tightly woven, when many parts are linked so strongly that they cannot be separated without losing the meaning of the whole. Instead of thinking of the brain as a collection of isolated rooms, you can imagine it as an elaborate tapestry. The more threads connect across the fabric, the richer and more unified the picture becomes. Scientists try to measure this connectedness, and although they use mathematical tools to do so, we can think of it simply as how deeply information blends together. There is also the idea of the predictive brain, one that is constantly guessing what will happen next. In this picture, your mind isn't a passive receiver of the world, but an active storyteller. It forms expectations, checks them against incoming sensations, and corrects itself in a loop. You do not simply hear a sound. Your brain predicts the next moment of that sound, then adjusts when the real world confirms or contradicts it. Consciousness, in this view, is the ongoing dance of expectation meeting reality. All of these classical descriptions have something in common. They are built from the behavior of neurons and networks, from the chemistry and electricity of the brain's physical form. They give real insights into how the brain processes the world and organizes thoughts. They help explain attention, memory, perception, decision-making. And yet, even with their elegance and detail, something remains just out of reach. Because none of these theories, at least not yet, fully explain why any of this activity should feel like anything. Why sparks jumping from cell to cell should create a sense of warmth when you think of someone you love, or the sharpness of disappointment, or the comfort of drifting into sleep. They tell us a great deal about how information moves, but not why there is someone behind the information, experiencing it from within. This gap is not a failure of neuroscience. It is simply an unfinished story. And within that unfinished space, some researchers have wondered whether the answer might involve something deeper than the classical picture allows. Perhaps there is something happening in the smallest structures of the brain, something delicate and hidden, shaped by the strange rules of the quantum world, not replacing the classical brain, but resting beneath it, the way the subtle grain of wood rests beneath the smooth surface of a polished table. Before we drift toward those quantum ideas, it helps to hold this classical picture gently in mind. It is the foundation. It is the stage on which any deeper theory must stand. Your brain, this quiet city of sparks and whispers, is already extraordinary. The fact that billions of tiny events can come together to create a moment of awareness. This moment, right now, is remarkable enough. Whether something even more mysterious lies beneath it is a question we will approach carefully, like stepping from the brightness of a room into the dim glow of a deeper hallway. We'll move toward that hallway soon, letting the classical brain fade into the background as we look at what might lie underneath it. Checklist for this session. Content is approx. 800 wonders words. Calm, slow-paced, soothing narrative style. Soft transitions between all ideas, no hard labels. Neuroscience concepts translated into simple imagery. City lights, messages, theatres, tapestries. No formulas, symbols, or technical notation. Everyday examples used. City at night, alley messages, flocking birds, theatres, tapestries, predictions. Scientific concepts presented. Neurons, synapses, emergence. Global workspace, softly. Integrated information, softly. Predictive brain models. You might still be resting comfortably, letting the images of neurons and quiet electrical sparks fade into the background. The classical brain is a remarkable structure, and for most of science it has been the main guide to understanding the mind. But even if we accept everything it explains, how signals move, how networks form, how patterns arise, there is still a gentle question waiting beneath it all. It is not loud or dramatic. It is more like a soft tug at the edge of awareness, the kind of question that appears only when you slow down enough to feel its presence. Why does any of this activity feel like something from the inside? To approach that question, it helps to imagine the brain not as something magical, but simply as an incredibly complex physical system. Picture again the city at night, buzzing with signals, lights flickering in beautiful shifting patterns. If you were an outside observer looking at that city from a hill, you could describe it in detail. You could count the windows that glow, trace the paths of cars on distant roads, listen to the rise and fall of traffic. All of it would make sense as a pattern of activity. And yet, no matter how much you observe, you would never know what it feels like to live inside one of those houses, or to be on one of those roads, or to stand under one of those lamps. The brain is similar. From the outside, we can map its signals with astonishing precision. We can measure how quickly messages travel. We can see which areas light up when someone recognizes a face or hears a melody. We even know how networks shift when a person pays attention or drifts into daydream. But none of that tells us what the person is experiencing in that moment. The inside and the outside remain different worlds. Imagine for a moment touching something cold, a glass of water fresh from the refrigerator. Classical neuroscience can trace the signals from your skin, through the nerves in your arm, up the pathways in your spine, and into the regions of your brain that analyze temperature. It can show how these signals combine with memory, estimation, and expectation. But it cannot explain why the coldness has a particular sensation associated with it, why it feels sharp or crisp or refreshing, why it feels like anything at all, or take the colour red. From a scientific perspective, red is just a narrow slice of the spectrum, a certain rhythm of light. Your eyes detect that rhythm, your brain processes it, and neurons fire in specific patterns. But none of this machinery explains why red has a unique character to it, why it burns with a warmth distinct from blue or green. You can describe the wavelengths, the receptors, the pathways, but the experience of redness remains something extra, something inward. Some people compare this to cooking. You can list every ingredient of a soup: carrots, onions, salt, broth. But the taste that emerges is something more than the sum of the parts. Emergence can explain how complexity rises from simplicity, but it cannot quite explain how experience rises from biology. It does not tell us why the soup has a warmth that feels familiar, or why a memory from childhood can settle into you like the steam rising from the bowl. Scientists have tried to bridge this gap in many ways. Some say consciousness is simply the brain monitoring itself. Others say it is the tight weaving of information across the system. Still others picture it as the brain's way of predicting the next moment in time. These are thoughtful, elegant ideas. They each capture part of the story. But none of them fully explain why the story is told from the inside, or why it is illuminated by awareness. A useful way to imagine this is to think of a book. You can describe its structure, the number of pages, the pattern of ink, the arrangement of letters. You can even analyse the grammar and the rhythm of the sentences. But none of that tells you what it feels like to read it. The experience is not in the shapes of the letters. It lies somewhere else, in the way the words gather inside your mind, in the feeling they create as you follow them. Consciousness may be like that. We can describe the structures, the signals, the organisation. But the experience that flows through those structures escapes simple description. Another example might be music. A song can be analysed as vibrations in the air, rising and falling with precise patterns. But the emotion you feel when listening to it, the way it settles in your chest or moves through your thoughts, cannot be found in the vibration alone. It is something layered on top, something that arises but has its own character. The classical brain explains the vibration. The mystery is what turns the vibration into feeling. And this brings us back to that gentle question. Why does this physical system, your brain, give rise to an inner world, while other physical systems, like a stone or a circuit board, do not seem to? Or perhaps they do, in some way we do not yet understand. We tend to assume awareness belongs only to living minds, but that assumption is not something science has proven. It is simply the most familiar explanation. As you rest here, you might reflect on the fact that your entire experience, the softness of the pillow, the weight of your body, the tone of this voice, is happening inside a structure made of cells and chemistry. And yet, it does not feel mechanical. It feels warm, intimate, and deeply personal. There is a quietness to it that no description of neurons can fully capture. This tension between the physical brain and the inner experience has led some researchers to look beyond the classical picture. Not to replace it, it is far too successful for that, but to search for something deeper beneath it. A layer of reality that might explain why consciousness is not simply information processing, but something richer, something with depth and texture. Some have wondered whether the answer might lie in the smallest scales of nature, where particles do not behave like tiny billiard balls, but like shifting possibilities, where a thing can be in more than one state until something causes it to choose, where connections can form between distant points without any visible link. Could it be that consciousness, with its unity and richness, draws something from that level of reality? We do not need to answer that question yet. For now, it is enough to understand why the classical picture, as powerful as it is, still leaves a gentle mystery glowing within it. A mystery that invites us to explore more deeply, to peer beneath the familiar, and to wonder what truly lies at the roots of awareness. If you're still with me, awake or drifting in that pleasant haze where thoughts start to loosen, we can take a gentle step into a very different landscape. Until now, we have lingered in the classical world, the world of neurons and sparks, of cells whispering to one another. But beneath that familiar world lies another one, stranger and quieter, where our ordinary ideas about reality do not quite work the way we expect. This is the quantum world, and entering it is less like walking into a laboratory and more like walking into a dream where the rules bend in soft, unexpected ways. You can imagine shrinking yourself down past the level of cells, past the proteins and molecules, until you reach a realm where things no longer behave like solid objects. In this place, a particle is not exactly a tiny marble or a speck. Instead, it becomes something more like a shimmering cloud of possibilities, a gentle blur that does not choose a single form until something forces its hand. This is often called superposition, but we do not need the word. You can simply imagine a coin spinning in the air, never quite landing on heads or tails, suspended in that in-between moment where both outcomes seem to breathe at once. In the everyday world, everything feels definite. A lamp is either on or off, a door is open or closed. But at this small scale, nature behaves differently. A tiny piece of matter can rest in several states at once, as though the universe has not yet made up its mind. It is not confusion, and it is not indecision. It is simply the quiet way reality works when it is unobserved, when no larger system comes along to interrupt it. Then there is the strange idea that particles can be connected across distances in a way that seems almost impossible. Imagine two small lights, born together like twins. After they separate, something links them so deeply that a change in one immediately changes the other, no matter how far they travel. This relationship is often described with complex mathematics, but you can picture it as two bells tuned so perfectly that when you strike one, the other gives a faint answering hum, even if they sit in different rooms. The bells don't send signals, they simply remain part of the same quiet pattern. This is sometimes called entanglement, but again, names are not important. What matters is the feeling of it, the idea that at the deepest level, the universe may hold connections that do not rely on wires or bridges, but on a kind of silent pairing woven into the fabric of reality itself. Another gentle mystery appears when scientists try to observe these tiny events. When no one is looking, a particle behaves like a soft cloud spreading in many directions at once. But when something measures it, when light hits it, or an instrument waits to record its position, it suddenly becomes precise, as though the act of looking presses the world into making a definite choice. This is called the measurement problem, but you can imagine it as a child hiding behind curtains, freely wandering the room until someone opens the door and asks, "Where are you?" Only then does the child freeze and choose a spot. This does not mean human consciousness magically forces the universe into shape. It simply means that delicate states do not survive contact with large, noisy environments. The act of observing in the scientific sense means interacting with the system so strongly that its quiet possibilities collapse into a single outcome. The universe picks a location, a value, a state. The gentle cloud becomes a single point. Many paths become one. Wave-like behavior is another part of this world. Even particles of matter, tiny pieces that make up the objects around you, can behave like ripples spreading across a pond. If you imagine dropping two pebbles into water, their ripples overlap, creating bright lines where they reinforce each other and dim lines where they cancel out. In the quantum world, tiny objects can create similar patterns. It is as though the world at this scale is built from small waves that carry information about every possible path. When scientists send single particles through a barrier with small openings, the particles create patterns on the far side that look like the ripples from water waves. But the strange part is that these patterns appear even when particles travel one by one. It is as though each particle explores many paths at once, sampling the landscape like a whisper moving through a tunnel, deciding on its destination only at the last moment. Of course, these ideas can feel unreal. They seem almost too poetic to be the workings of the physical world. Yet they are not fantasies. They form the basis of the technology, you use every day, from computers to lasers to the devices that record this very voice. Quantum rules are not strange exceptions. They are the deep architecture beneath everything we see. It can be helpful to imagine the quantum world not as a separate place, but as the foundation of the ordinary world. Much like the grain beneath polished wood, or the currents beneath the surface of the ocean, quantum behavior is always present. It is only when you zoom out far enough into the scale of chairs, houses, and people that the weirdness fades and the everyday rules take over. In this quiet moment, as you lie or sit wherever you are, your body is made of countless particles following these rules. The atoms in your skin hold together because tiny particles share waves between them. The light entering your eyes dances through space like ripples before turning into electrical signals. Even the warmth you feel is a measure of countless particles jostling gently, exchanging small bursts of energy. None of this feels unusual because the sensations blend into one smooth experience. But beneath that smoothness is a world that does not behave at all like the world of large objects. A world that seems to prefer possibilities over precision, relationship over distance, and softness over certainty. We're not yet asking whether this quantum strangeness has anything to do with consciousness. We are simply getting familiar with the terrain, letting our minds adjust to a realm where tiny things behave like waves, where pairs share quiet bonds across space, and where the act of observing shapes what we see. Soon, we will explore why some researchers believe the roots of awareness may reach down into this hidden layer of reality. But for now, it is enough to let this image settle. Beneath every moment of experience, beneath every thought and every sensation, lies a world shaped by shimmering possibilities, a world that may hold clues to the mystery of why there is an inner life at all. As we settle into this next stretch of the journey, you might let your breathing slow just a little more. The classical brain, with its cities of neurons and quiet electrical sparks, is still resting in the background of your thoughts. But now we begin to move beneath that familiar structure, toward something more delicate. The idea we're exploring is simple and profound. Even though the brain functions at a scale we can see with a microscope, it is built from pieces that belong to a far smaller world, a world governed by quantum rules. It can help to imagine zooming in again, slowly. Picture the room around you, whatever small details you can sense. Now imagine shrinking yourself down until the objects lose their familiar shapes. You pass below the grain of wood, below the texture of fabric, below the surface of skin. The world becomes molecules, then atoms, and finally the strange shimmering realm of tiny particles. At this scale, the rules of the everyday world fall away. Particles no longer behave like objects with clear positions and paths. They drift, hum, and exist in soft clouds of possibilities. This is not separate from you. Every thought you have, every sensation in your skin, every emotion rising and fading depends on these tiny pieces. The entire classical brain is built from particles following quantum laws. Even the electrical currents that race through neurons depend on interactions at the atomic level. Every spark in every nerve is shaped by the movements of small charged particles, each of which follows the rules of the quantum world. This can feel strange at first. The brain is warm, it is constantly active. It is full of motion, collisions, and chatter. When you think of quantum behavior, you might imagine frozen laboratories, delicate experiments, and silent rooms where scientists try to keep every outside influence away. But nature, in its quiet wisdom, built the brain without any of that protection. And because of this, many researchers assume that the delicate states of the quantum world dissolve too quickly to matter inside your mind. Imagine placing a single candle flame in the middle of a busy train station. People pass by. Doors open and close. Voices rise and fall. The candle flickers once, twice, and then goes out, overcome by the movement around it. Some scientists believe quantum states in the brain would behave like that, too fragile to survive the warmth and constant activity of living tissue. According to this view, the candle of quantum coherence would disappear long before it could influence thought or experience. There is a mathematical argument behind this idea, but we do not need the formal expression. We can keep it simple. Quantum effects are known to be delicate. They often require cold temperatures or carefully isolated environments. The brain, by contrast, is warm and busy, pulsing with life. So the traditional view is that quantum behavior fades instantly, long before it can play a meaningful role. But is this the whole story? Perhaps not. It turns out that nature does not always follow our expectations. In many living systems, plants collecting sunlight, birds sensing the Earth's magnetic field, enzymes nudging reactions forward, quantum behavior has been found surviving in conditions that once seemed impossible. These discoveries do not prove the brain uses quantum mechanisms, but they do open the door to the possibility. They remind us that the universe can be more resourceful and more subtle than our assumptions allow. To understand why this matters, imagine the brain again as that nighttime city. You see the lights flickering in the windows, the traffic flowing through the streets. This is the classical level of the brain, the everyday world where electrical signals pass from cell to cell. But beneath the pavement, deep below the foundations of the tallest buildings, lies another layer. It is the quantum bedrock upon which the entire city stands. Without it, the buildings could not exist. The lights could not shine. The streets could not carry a single thought. This bedrock is always present, even if the city rarely reveals signs of it. And every so often, nature finds ways to use this deeper layer to accomplish something that classical processes alone could not. This raises the question, could the brain be doing something similar? Could there be pockets within its structure, tiny quiet corners, where quantum properties survive just long enough to play a role in how thoughts arise? It helps to think of the brain not as uniformly noisy, but as a landscape with many different regions. Some are bustling like city centres, full of traffic and electrical storms. Others are quieter, like gardens at dusk. Within neurons, there are even quieter spaces, deep inside the cell, where structures like microtubules create orderly frameworks. These internal structures are small enough, intricate enough, and sheltered enough that some researchers wonder whether they might preserve delicate quantum states longer than expected. We will explore these structures more soon. For now, the important idea is that the brain is not a single environment. It is a collection of environments, some loud, some gentle, some tucked away. And the quantum world, strange though it is, forms the foundation for all of them. Imagine tiny ripples of possibility beneath the surface of every thought. Not thoughts themselves, not feelings or memories, but the raw ingredients from which those experiences are built. If consciousness has roots in the quantum world, those roots would not appear as flashes of magic or sudden shifts. They would appear as the smallest nudges, shaping the behaviour of cells and networks from beneath, the way deep ocean currents slowly guide the waves at the surface. As you sit or lie here now, your brain is quietly alive with activity. Signals are moving, networks are shifting, memories are settling into place. But beneath all of this, countless tiny processes unfold, processes that belong to a world where possibility and reality blend, where particles drift through many paths before choosing one, and where connections can form without contact. We do not yet know whether these quantum events play any role in consciousness, but the fact that your brain is built from them, that your entire experience rests upon a web of tiny shimmering states, creates a sense of wonder. And that sense of wonder is enough to guide us gently forward. Soon we will look at how nature uses quantum effects in plants, animals, and other living systems. These examples may offer a hint, just a hint, of how the brain might borrow similar tricks. But for now, you can let the image settle. Your mind, with all its richness, stands upon a foundation shaped by the quiet laws of the quantum world. As we drift further into this exploration, it can be calming to remember that nothing in the natural world is truly separate. Even the most surprising discoveries usually exist quietly in places we never thought to look. Quantum mechanics, for a long time, seemed like something that belonged only to cold laboratories and delicate instruments, far away from the warmth and constant motion of living things. But over the past few decades, scientists have found hints that nature has been using quantum tricks all along. Not in mysterious or mystical ways, but in small, elegant processes that help life do what it does best: survive, adapt, and thrive. Imagine starting with something as familiar as sunlight falling on a leaf. You've probably watched sunlight pass through branches on a warm day, scattering patterns across the ground. But inside each leaf, something far more delicate unfolds. A leaf captures sunlight in special structures that guide energy along winding paths. Scientists once believed this journey was like a ball rolling down a hill, bouncing from point to point until it reached its destination. But deeper investigation revealed something stranger. The energy does not choose one path. It seems to explore many possibilities at once, like a traveller testing several routes simultaneously before deciding which one works best. This behaviour is reminiscent of a ripple spreading through water, touching every corner of a pond before settling into a steady flow. In the leaf, the energy finds its most efficient route, almost as if the system searches through its options in parallel. This is one of the strongest clues that quantum effects, once thought too fragile for warm environments, can survive long enough to matter in living systems. A similar story appears in the eyes of migratory birds. Many species travel astonishing distances, crossing continents, oceans, and mountain ranges with uncanny accuracy. For years, biologists wondered how birds sense direction with such precision. Then a new picture emerged. Inside their eyes may lie a tiny chemical compass sensitive to Earth's magnetic field. This compass works only if two small particles inside a molecule maintain a delicate connection for a brief moment, a connection so subtle that it resembles a quantum pairing. If this link breaks too quickly, the compass fails. Yet somehow, inside a living bird flying through wind and rain, the connection lasts long enough to guide its journey. You can imagine this quantum pairing like two dancers who learned a routine together when they were young. Even when separated, their movements echo one another. The world around them, the wind, the noise, the chaos, tries to pull them apart. But for a short time, they remember the same rhythm. It is this moment of shared rhythm that helps the bird sense direction. Again, something once thought too delicate for biological systems turns out to play a role in everyday survival. Another example lies in the tiny engines of life. Enzymes. These molecules help chemical reactions happen far faster than they would on their own. For decades, biologists assumed enzymes simply pushed chemicals together, increasing the chances that reactions would occur. But deeper studies suggest that enzymes might help particles slip through barriers rather than climbing over them. Imagine approaching a wall. You expect to leap or climb. Yet in the quantum world, there are times when a particle simply appears on the other side, as though it found a hidden doorway. This hidden doorway effect seems to help enzymes make reactions almost unimaginably fast. The process is subtle and brief, but real. Nature uses it constantly, in every cell of your body, every moment of your life. There is even a hypothesis that your sense of smell might rely on quantum behaviour. Traditionally, scientists believed you recognize odours because molecules fit into receptors in your nose, like keys fitting into locks. But this explanation has gaps. It struggles to explain why some molecules that look different smell the same, or why slight changes in shape cause big changes in scent. Another idea suggests that your nose does not only sense shape, it also senses the gentle vibrations of molecules. These tiny vibrations ripple like small notes, and your receptors can detect them. Some researchers believe this detection might involve a quantum process, where electrons move in response not to shape, but to these subtle vibrations. Whether or not this specific idea is correct, it points to something important. Nature often uses tiny physical processes in ways that classical descriptions alone cannot fully capture. The world of biology is not separate from the quantum world. It is built on it, shaped by it, and sometimes quietly enhanced by it. If all of this is happening in leaves, bird, enzymes, and possibly your own senses, it raises an intriguing possibility. Perhaps the brain, an organ far more complex and structured than any leaf or enzyme, might also rely on delicate processes that arise from the quantum layer of reality. Not everywhere in the brain, and not constantly, but in small niches where conditions are just right. Warmth does not always destroy quantum behavior. Noise does not always overwhelm it. Sometimes the universe creates pockets of stability, small safe harbors where delicate states survive longer than expected. You can imagine these pockets as tiny sanctuaries inside the body, places where the constant jostling of particles is momentarily softened, allowing a fragile connection or a quiet ripple of possibilities to persist. These sanctuaries do not need to hold quantum states for long. Even a brief moment, a few thousandths of a second or even less, can be enough for nature to do something useful. Quantum biology is still young, and we do not yet know how far its reach extends. But the examples we have already discovered show us that life is not limited by our assumptions. It uses whatever tools the universe provides, even those that seem too delicate, too strange, or too fleeting to survive in the messy world of living cells. And if the rest of nature can borrow these tricks, if leaves can guide energy with wave-like efficiency, if birds can feel the magnetic field with delicate pairs, if enzymes can open hidden doorways, and if our senses may rely on subtle vibrations, then perhaps the brain, with all its quiet depth, may hold surprises of its own. As we drift further into this landscape of hidden possibilities, it may help to take a moment and notice your own body again, the heaviness in your limbs, the soft rhythm of your breathing, the stillness behind your closed or half-closed eyes. Everything you're experiencing right now is woven together by your brain, an organ that feels solid, warm, and familiar. But inside that warm structure lie shapes and patterns far smaller than anything we touched in earlier sessions. These are the quiet internal frameworks of the cell, so small and delicate that they seem almost too subtle to matter. Yet some researchers believe that within these tiny structures might lie the hints of something deeper. To begin, imagine a neuron not as a mysterious object, but as a miniature world with its own architecture. Inside each neuron is a network of hollow cylindrical fibers called microtubules. They run through the cell like an intricate railway system, forming tracks and scaffolds that give the neuron shape and support. In most biology classes, microtubules are described as part of the cell's skeleton, useful, structural, necessary. But to some scientists, these tiny cylinders are more than just beams and braces. They are narrow, precisely organised spaces, sheltered enough that certain delicate processes might survive inside them. You can picture a microtubule as a long tunnel made of repeating rings. Each ring is built from small protein units that arrange themselves with geometric precision, creating a spiral that twists gently along the tube's length. If you imagine shrinking yourself down into one of these tunnels, you might feel as though you were walking through the corridor of a sunlit cathedral, the repeating arches rising above you in perfect symmetry. It is in spaces like these, narrow, ordered, sheltered, that some researchers believe the quiet stirrings of quantum behavior might linger just long enough to matter. One of the central ideas here comes from the thought that these structures may allow tiny particles inside them to maintain special, in-between states for brief moments. These are not particles choosing a single place or direction. They are particles holding several possibilities at once, like that spinning coin we imagined earlier. In most parts of the warm, busy brain, such delicate states would dissolve quickly, swept away by constant collisions and noise. But the inside of a microtubule is different. It is a place of order, a place where, at least in theory, the environment may be calm enough for these fragile possibilities to survive long enough to have an influence. Another idea reaches even deeper than microtubules, into the tiny cores of atoms themselves. Every atom has a centre, a nucleus, that can behave almost like a tiny compass needle, pointing in certain directions depending on its internal structure. In everyday life, these directions shift chaotically, altered constantly by the environment. But researchers have proposed that certain nuclei, especially those belonging to atoms in molecules rich in phosphorus, can hold their direction for surprisingly long times. If you imagine each nucleus as a small spinning top, these tops may keep their orientation steady even while everything around them churns and vibrates. If true, this stability could allow these tiny tops to act as carriers of delicate information. A pair of them could even form a gentle connection, like two dancers learning a routine together, keeping their steps in sync across short distances within the cell. These dances would be brief, almost unimaginably brief, but they might be just long enough to help shape how signals travel or how patterns form inside the neuron. And even the smallest nudge in the right place, repeated many times across billions of cells, could help create rhythms that influence the brain's broader activity. There is even a proposal that certain clusters of atoms might form small protective shelters, allowing these spinning nuclei to remain coordinated longer than expected. You can imagine these shelters like tiny pockets of calm inside a bustling marketplace. The world outside is chaotic. Voices, footsteps, activity everywhere. But inside the pocket, for a moment, there is stillness. The idea is that within these calm pockets, delicate states might survive long enough to matter. None of this means the brain is a quantum computer in the way we talk about machines. It does not mean thoughts hop between possibilities like fleeting sparks. Instead, the idea is much gentler. It suggests that once in a while, inside a neuron, small structures may allow subtle nudges to form. Nudges shaped not by the classical rules of everyday biology, but by the quieter, more flexible rules that govern the tiny pieces of reality. And when billions of such nudges interact with the brain's larger networks, they might help shape how patterns of activity unfold. It is important to remember that these ideas are still hypotheses. They have not been proven, and many scientists question whether these delicate states can survive long enough to play any meaningful role. But even in their uncertainty, these proposals offer a sense of possibility. They remind us that the brain is not just an electrical network or a chemical machine. It is a structure built from layers upon layers of complexity, each resting on deeper rules we're only beginning to understand. If the brain does use these tiny structures to help shape experience, it may not be doing so all the time. It may happen only in specific regions or under specific conditions, or during precise moments when the brain is quiet enough for subtle influences to matter. Perhaps during deep rest, or moments of insight, or the edges of sleep, where everything inside you softens and the boundary between thought and awareness becomes thin. As you rest here now, listening to this calm unfolding, it can be soothing to imagine this inner architecture at work. A brain made of cells, cells filled with frameworks lined with quiet corridors. Within those corridors, tiny pieces of matter holding whispers of possibility. Not loud, not dramatic, just small influences woven gently into the larger flow of your mind. Soon, we will explore the bold theories that try to connect all these pieces together. Ideas that attempt to describe how structures like microtubules or spinning nuclei might help create the moments of consciousness you experience. But for now it is enough to sit with the image of these quiet structures lying deep within you, shaping the texture of your thoughts in ways we are only beginning to imagine. As we drift into the next part of our journey, the quiet structures of the brain we explored earlier, microtubules, spinning nuclei, protected pockets, begin to soften into the background. They become a kind of gentle foundation for a more daring idea, one that has fascinated and divided scientists for decades. It is the suggestion that consciousness might emerge from small, delicate events deep inside these structures. Not from electrical sparks alone, not from the flow of chemistry or the chatter of neurons, but from something quieter, something that lives in the boundary between possibility and reality. This idea is known as Orch-OR, short for a longer name that we won't need to use here. The name itself is not as important as the intuition behind it. The theory began with the work of a mathematician, someone who spent his life thinking about the deep structure of the universe. He wondered whether the process of a thought, of recognizing a memory, or choosing a word, or simply being aware, might involve moments where the universe itself makes a small decision. Not a choice in the human sense, but a settling. A kind of quiet shift where a set of possibilities narrows into one. Imagine holding a snow globe in your hands. When you shake it, the flakes whirl into a storm, each flake following a path that seems unpredictable. But eventually, after a few seconds, the swirling slows, the flakes drift downward, and one by one they settle into place. Each flake lands in a particular spot, chosen from countless possibilities. In Orch-OR, a thought is imagined as something similar, not made of snowflakes of course, but shaped by countless potential states swirling in a tiny region of the brain until one becomes real. These tiny regions, the theory suggests, could be the microtubules inside neurons, those long, spiralling tunnels we imagined earlier. The idea is that inside these narrow corridors, small patterns of possibility might form, patterns where particles exist in gently overlapping states. These patterns would be fleeting, softer than a breath, and shorter than a blink, but for a moment they would hold several potential outcomes at once, and just as the flakes in the snow globe eventually settle, these possibilities would also settle into a single outcome. According to Orch-OR, each settling could contribute to a moment of awareness, a pulse in the rhythm of consciousness. One image that may help is to imagine an orchestra in a quiet concert hall. The musicians sit poised with their instruments, each holding a note in potential. For a brief moment, the hall is filled not with sound, but with the readiness for sound. This collective stillness, this poised potential, is a state where countless musical futures are possible. And then, with a single unified breath, the orchestra begins. The silence collapses into a specific melody. The moment becomes music. In the Orch-OR story, the microtubules are like the poised musicians. They hold patterns of possibility in a quiet, ordered space. And the moment these patterns settle, a tiny fragment of experience is born. Not a thought in words, not an emotion, but something more fundamental, a grain of awareness that later becomes part of a larger moment of consciousness. Billions of these subtle pulses could weave together into what you experience as the continuity of your mind. It is important to say gently that this theory is bold, very bold. Many scientists question whether microtubules truly hold such delicate states long enough to matter. Others question whether the settling of these states could ever influence something as complex as awareness. And yet, the theory persists, not because it has been proven, but because it offers a bridge, a possible way to connect the strange, shimmering world of quantum behavior with the warm, living world of the brain. The idea is not that consciousness floats above biology, or that it breaks the rules of physics. Instead, the theory imagines that awareness arises when the deepest layer of physical reality, the layer that works with possibilities rather than certainties, interacts with the delicate structures inside neurons. It is a way of saying that consciousness might be both physical and more than physical at the same time, not supernatural, but rooted in a subtle dimension of nature that we are only beginning to understand. This does not mean that every thought is a quantum event, or that every neuron is constantly shimmering with possibility. Instead, the suggestion is gentler, that the deepest moments of awareness, the ones that create the flow of your inner life, might arise from countless tiny events happening inside microtubules. Like tiny lanterns glowing in the dark, each flickering with a brief pulse before fading, only to be replaced by the next. When countless lanterns flicker in harmony, the theory suggests a moment of consciousness appears. Whether this theory is right or not is still unknown. It may turn out that microtubules play no direct role in awareness, or it may turn out that they play a role we do not yet understand. But even as a possibility, it opens a door to thinking about consciousness in a new way. Instead of seeing awareness as a byproduct of electrical signals alone, it invites us to imagine that consciousness may arise from many layers of reality, some familiar, some hidden. As you rest here now, listening to these quiet ideas, you might imagine your own mind as a layered world. On the surface, the familiar thoughts, memories, and sensations ripple like waves. Beneath that, networks of neurons light up like cities, and beneath even that, tiny structures create quiet corridors where possibilities drift like mist inside a tunnel. Somewhere in that interplay, between the living tissue and the quantum possibilities beneath it, lies the simple fact that you are aware, the fact that you are here, in this moment, listening. Whether Orch-OR describes this process correctly is a question for science to explore slowly over time. But the imagery it offers, the idea of moments where reality gently chooses among possibilities, gives us a poetic, tender way to imagine the rhythm of thought. As the idea of Orch-OR gently settles behind us like the fading echo of a soft note, we can drift toward another set of possibilities. These next ideas do not replace the story we just explored. Instead, they sit nearby, neighbouring possibilities that imagine the brain using quantum properties in slightly different ways. Where Orch-OR pictures microtubules as quiet corridors guiding delicate patterns, these alternative proposals imagine the brain using tiny spinning seeds of information, sheltered inside small protective clusters. Each idea is an attempt to answer the same quiet question. If the mind holds more than classical physics alone can explain, where might the deeper layer be hiding? To explore this, imagine shrinking even further into the architecture of a neuron, beyond the long tunnels of the microtubules, beyond the scaffolding and machinery, deeper into the world of atoms themselves. Each atom has a small core at its centre, a nucleus. And inside that nucleus lies something we can imagine as a small rotating arrow, an inner orientation that can point in different directions. In physics, this is sometimes described as spin, but we can let go of that word. Instead, picture it as a tiny spinning top, small enough to sit on the head of a pin, turning with a quiet persistence that ignores much of the chaos around it. Normally, these tiny tops lose their orientation quickly. They wobble, tumble, and fall out of sync under the constant bumping and jostling of the warm environment around them. But researchers have suggested that certain types of atoms, especially those in molecules rich in phosphorus, may keep their spinning arrangement steady far longer than expected. Longer even than some of the delicate patterns imagined inside microtubules. You can imagine each nucleus as holding a gentle direction, almost like a whisper. And in some special circumstances, two of these tiny spinning whispers may become connected, holding a matched orientation that stays in harmony even as the world around them shifts. It is a little like two dancers who learned a quiet, intricate routine together. Even if they step into different rooms, even if the music grows louder or softer, they move with a shared memory of the steps. They keep their rhythm long enough for something meaningful to happen. Some researchers believe these pairs of spinning nuclei could serve as small carriers of delicate information inside the brain. Not messages in the usual sense, not thoughts or memories, but subtle threads that influence how cells respond, how signals travel, or how patterns unfold. These influences would be incredibly faint, far below anything we would notice consciously. But in a structure as intricate and interconnected as the brain, even the smallest nudge repeated in many places could help shape the larger pattern of activity. To support this idea, another structure is proposed, something even smaller and quieter than the microtubules we've seen. Imagine a cluster of atoms forming a gentle protective shell. Inside this shell, the spinning nuclei might find shelter from the constant storm of vibrations and chemical interactions that would normally disrupt them. You can think of these clusters like tiny islands in a busy harbour. Boats move all around them, waves crash, voices fill the air. But on the sheltered parts of the island, the wind softens and the noise fades. For a moment, stillness appears where there should be none. These protective clusters, sometimes compared to small crystalline shapes, may be stable enough to hold delicate spinning orientations long enough to matter. And if several of these clusters exist inside or near the same neuron, they might form a set of tiny, quiet pockets that allow fragile information to persist just long enough to shape what comes next. This is the essence of one alternative quantum brain proposal, that the brain may not need large-scale quantum structures or long tunnels of synchronized possibilities. Instead, it may rely on the stubbornness of tiny spinning nuclei, each protected in its own hidden island, holding onto their orientation just long enough to play a part in the brain's internal rhythm. It's important to note that these ideas are speculative, just as bold and debated as the Orch-OR framework. No one has yet recorded these spinning nuclei influencing a thought or shaping a memory. But the theoretical possibility arises from a simple question. If nature already uses quantum behavior in plants and birds and enzymes, why would the brain be an exception? Why wouldn't it also have found a way, over millions of years of evolution, to use whatever the universe offers? One of the most peaceful aspects of this proposal is that it does not conflict with other theories. Instead of insisting that microtubules must be the centre of the story, or that spinning nuclei must be the key, these ideas simply share a quiet space. They imagine different ways the brain might whisper with the language of the quantum world. Perhaps both are partly right. Perhaps the brain uses several tiny tools at once, each contributing its own faint influence toward the broader experience of awareness. It can be calming to imagine this layered system. Picture a neuron again, not as a single unit, but as a landscape filled with quiet corners. In one part, microtubules hum with subtle patterns of possibility, like strings in a dim cathedral. In another, tiny protected islands shelter spinning nuclei, each one holding its delicate direction. Together, these quiet corners might help shape the mind in ways we do not yet understand. Whether these ideas will one day be proven, or whether they will inspire new theories that replace them, remains a question for the future. For now, they simply offer a gentle thought that the brain, in its depth and complexity, may be using many layers of reality at once: classical signals, chemical messengers, electrical flows, and perhaps in its quietest spaces, hints of quantum structure that help shape the very rhythm of awareness. As we move gently forward, the mind begins to feel like a layered landscape. In earlier sessions, we walked through tunnels inside neurons, watched tiny spinning tops turn in sheltered pockets, and explored quiet structures that might hold delicate possibilities. But now we drift into a different direction, not deeper into the brain's architecture, but outward into the patterns of thought themselves. Here, in the realm of choices and memories, something surprising appears. Even without quantum processes happening physically inside the brain, the way we think sometimes behaves like tiny waves overlapping and blending. You might imagine this by picturing a small pond at dusk. If you toss two stones into the water at the same time, their ripples spread outward and collide. Where the ripples meet, they create patterns, some places where the waves add together, making bigger peaks, and other places where they cancel out, leaving pockets of stillness. And these patterns feel gentle, almost hypnotic, and yet they emerge from the simplest actions of tossing a pebble. Human decisions in certain situations behave in a strangely similar way. They do not always follow clear, predictable paths. Instead, your thoughts can overlap like those ripples in the pond. Two possibilities can coexist in your mind for a while, each influencing the other, neither one fully chosen. Only when you finally decide, when you look at the situation closely, do the ripples settle into a single choice. This kind of behaviour has caught the attention of psychologists and mathematicians for years. When people make decisions under uncertainty, or when they answer certain kinds of survey questions, their responses do not always align with the tidy expectations of classical logic. For example, imagine someone choosing between two dishes at a restaurant. They might lean toward the pasta. But when the waiter approaches and asks again, their mind shifts, as though a new ripple has entered the pond. Suddenly the salad seems appealing. And if you ask in a different order, or frame the options differently, the outcome changes again. It is as if the act of presenting the choice reshapes the decision itself. Classical models of decision-making assume that a person holds a fixed preference, waiting to be revealed. But in reality, many decisions feel more like a wave of possibilities, gently shifting as new information enters the mind. When researchers studied these patterns, they realized that the mathematics used to describe how tiny particles behave, waves overlapping, possibilities blending, also describe these human behaviors more accurately than classical models do. This doesn't mean the brain is literally using quantum processes to decide between pasta and salad. Instead, it means the patterns of our thinking resemble the patterns found in the quantum world. Consider memory. When you try to recall something, perhaps the name of a song or the face of someone you once knew, you don't always get a clean answer immediately. Sometimes your mind holds several partial memories at once, each one faint and incomplete. You might feel a melody beginning to surface, or a face almost forming, but it does not fully come into focus until a moment later. During that time, your mind rests in a state of overlapping possibilities, much like a wave pattern unfolding on the surface of water. There's also the curious way our answers can depend on the order of questions. If someone asks, "Do you enjoy meeting new people?" you might say yes. But if they first ask, "Do you often feel nervous around strangers?" your mind may shift, and the first question suddenly feels different. The ripple caused by the first question affects the next one. Classical logic struggles to explain this shifting pattern, but the mathematics of wave-like behaviour handles it almost naturally. Each question introduces a new ripple, which blends with those already in the pond of your thoughts. These observations form the basis of what some researchers call quantum cognition. It does not claim that your brain is a quantum machine, or that your thoughts travel through tiny tunnels of possibility inside microtubules. Instead, it offers a way of describing thought using the same mathematical ideas that help explain the behaviour of waves and tiny particles. In this picture, choices are not fixed points waiting to be revealed. They are shifting patterns shaped by context, order, memory, and the quiet drift of attention. Imagine standing at a crossroads. The classical picture of decision would say you already know which path you prefer. You simply need to reveal that preference. But quantum cognition suggests something gentler. It imagines that several paths may coexist in your mind at once, each with its own echo. And the moment you decide, which may be influenced by mood, framing, timing, or the presence of someone else, your mind collapses its ripples into one clear direction, just as a wave settling into a final shape. This does not undermine logic or reason. In fact, it reveals the richness of how humans think. It shows that our minds are not rigid machines but fluid, sensitive systems responding to the environment in subtle ways. Even small shifts in phrasing or timing can tip the balance of a decision, just as a pebble tossed at the edge of a pond can reshape the ripples already moving across the water. There is a quiet comfort in this. It means that indecision, confusion, or hesitation is not a flaw. It is simply the mind exploring possibilities, letting waves blend and overlap before settling. It means your thoughts have depth, sensitivity, and movement. They are not confined to strict logical rules, they flow. And while quantum cognition does not claim that thoughts themselves are quantum events, it opens a doorway to thinking about the mind more flexibly. It suggests that the concepts used to describe tiny particles, possibility, overlap, interaction, might also help describe the more mysterious parts of human experience. It hints that the border between physics and psychology might be softer than we once imagined. As we move forward, we will turn back to the classical theories again, not to contradict these ideas, but to show how they can coexist. For now, you can imagine your mind as a pond at twilight, its surface rippling gently with possibilities. Every choice, every memory, every question casts its own soft wave, blending with the others until one rises quietly to the surface and becomes your experience. As we drift forward through the quiet landscape of ideas, the quantum possibilities we've been exploring begin to soften at the edges. They linger in the background like faint stars, present, mysterious, and full of wonder. But before moving into the challenges and debates that scientists raise about these theories, it helps to return for a moment to a more familiar place, a place built not from fragile patterns of possibility, but from the well-studied structures of classical neuroscience. Here, theory is grounded in networks and signals, attention and memory, and the long-observed rhythms of the mind. This return is gentle, not abrupt. Think of it as stepping from a meadow of mist into a warm, lantern-lit room where the walls are lined with maps that chart the ways information travels across the brain. Scientists have spent decades studying these maps, tracing the flow of signals as they weave meaning into experience. And from these studies, several classical theories have emerged, each describing consciousness in its own way. None of them contradict the quantum possibilities we've discussed. Instead, they sit at a different layer of explanation, closer to the everyday functioning of the mind. One of these is the idea of the brain as a kind of mental theatre. Imagine a stage in the centre of a quiet auditorium. Countless things are happening backstage, whispers, movements, preparations, but only what is placed beneath the bright stage light becomes part of conscious awareness. This light is not a physical light, of course, but a metaphor for a process in which many parts of the brain gain access to the same information at the same time. When something enters this shared space, an image, a word, a memory, it becomes something you can think about, react to, or describe. Everything else remains in the shadows, processed silently and automatically. This idea, sometimes called a workspace, helps explain why certain experiences feel vivid while others pass unnoticed. You might be walking down a familiar street, lost in thought, not paying attention to the world around you. A car horn sounds, and suddenly your attention swings toward it. Information that was previously backstage leaps under the spotlight. Your awareness shifts. The theory imagines consciousness as this shifting circle of illumination, narrow at times, broad at others, always moving across the internal landscape. Another classical theory approaches the mind through the idea of woven information. If you imagine a tapestry hanging on a wall, the strength and richness of the image depend on how tightly the threads are intertwined. A loosely woven cloth shows gaps, holes, and fragile patches, but a densely woven tapestry holds its form even when tugged or stretched. Some researchers think of consciousness in a similar way. The more deeply linked the informational patterns are across different parts of the brain, the more unified your awareness becomes. In quiet moments, when your mind feels whole and steady, it is as though the tapestry is tightly interlocked, holding many threads together at once. This does not require any mathematics or special symbols to understand. It simply suggests that consciousness may arise when information is integrated, not scattered. When the brain's many regions exchange signals so richly that no single part can be separated from the story being experienced. the experience of listening to a piece of music, a melody that carries memories, emotions, and physical sensations, can be understood this way. Many parts of your brain respond at once, sharing and blending their reactions. The richness of the experience comes from this weaving. A third classical idea pictures the mind as a storyteller, not a storyteller who speaks aloud, but one who constantly predicts what will happen next. If you think about walking down a hallway you've walked 100 times, you might notice that your mind already anticipates the feel of the floor, the placement of shadows, the distance of each step. Much of the time, these predictions happen quietly and smoothly in the background. The brain expects, checks, and adjusts. When reality matches expectation, the process continues effortlessly. It is only when something surprising happens, someone calling your name from an unexpected doorway, or a misplaced object blocking your path, that the storyteller pauses and rewrites the script. In this view, consciousness is the meeting point between expectation and reality. It is where the mind's predictions are corrected, updated, and refined. The feeling of a sudden insight, the moment when a memory rises to the surface, or even the sensation of recognizing a familiar face. All of these involve the mind adjusting its own expectations. This process is not rigid. It flows like a conversation between the world and the inner storyteller, each shaping the other. These classical models do not contradict the quantum possibilities we've been exploring. Instead, they describe the mind at a different scale. If the quantum proposals imagine tiny structures shaping the rhythm of awareness, the classical theories imagine large networks organizing the content of that awareness. One layer might provide the faint pulses, the subtle nudges. Another layer might weave those nudges into familiar thoughts and perceptions. There is something comforting in this layered view. It means that consciousness does not need to be pinned to one single mechanism. It can emerge from many interacting processes, some quiet and microscopic, others broad and dynamic. It can arise from predictions meeting reality, from attention shifting across mental landscapes, from information weaving together into unified patterns. And beneath all of that, it might also draw from the subtle motions happening inside the smallest structures of the brain. As we drift toward the next sessions, where we will gently explore skepticism, challenges, and the difficulty of studying such delicate processes, it is helpful to hold this balanced view. Classical models tell one part of the story, quantum possibilities tell another, and the mind, in its quiet depth, may lie somewhere in the interplay between them. Up to this point, we've walked through possibilities that rest gently at the intersection of physics and biology, tiny tunnels in neurons that might hold patterns of potential, spinning atomic cores that might whisper to one another across small distances, and molecular structures that might offer brief shelters from the constant motion of the living tissue. These ideas are beautiful, imaginative, and worth exploring. But science, at its heart, is a conversation, a quiet back and forth between what is possible and what is testable. And as soon as the possibility of quantum influence in the brain is raised, a firm, reasonable question emerges from the classical world. How can such delicate behaviour survive inside something as warm and active as a living brain? To understand this challenge, imagine once more the world of quantum behaviour. It is a place where tiny particles drift through overlapping possibilities, where connections form without touch, and where waves of potential spread through the quiet spaces between atoms. But this fragile state depends on something important: stillness, or if not stillness, then at least a certain calm, a setting where the particle is not constantly bumped, jostled, heated, or disturbed by its surroundings. Now imagine dropping a single feather into a crowded marketplace. The feather tries to float gently downward, but the air is full of movement. People walking past, doors opening, voices rising and falling. Every shift of motion sends the feather spinning in a new direction. Before it can land softly, it has been pushed into a dozen chaotic paths. This is what researchers mean when they talk about the fragility of quantum effects in warm, noisy environments. The delicate patterns they rely on are easily disturbed by even the slightest interaction. A brain, by comparison, is far busier than any marketplace. Inside each neuron, molecules vibrate, water flows, ions drift across membranes, and chemical reactions unfold constantly. The temperature is warm and stable, perfect for the chemistry of life, but far from the cool, quiet stillness where delicate quantum states are thought to thrive. Every fraction of a second, billions of signals travel across networks. Cells change shape, proteins fold and unfold. The entire organ pulses with a living rhythm that never truly stops. From this perspective, it is understandable why many scientists express doubts. They argue that quantum possibilities inside microtubules or atomic spinning patterns inside molecular clusters would be overwhelmed almost instantly. A quiet ripple might form for a moment, but the warm, active environment would wash over it like a wave washing away a footprint in sand. The delicate state would dissolve long before it could influence anything larger, let alone something as intricate as conscious thought. One researcher once described the challenge by comparing quantum states to a soap bubble floating in a storm. Even without strong winds, a light brush of air can pop the bubble. Inside the brain, the winds never stop. Everything is movement, heat, and activity. How then could quantum bubbles persist long enough to matter? This argument, while gentle and reasonable, is not the end of the discussion. For even though quantum states are fragile, the world has surprised us before. In earlier sessions, we explored how plants use wave-like behavior to guide sunlight, how birds carry delicate connections in their eyes to sense direction, and how enzymes harness hidden doorways that depend on subtle quantum effects. These discoveries did not happen in icy laboratories. They happened inside warm, living organisms just as noisy and messy as we are. Nature, it seems, has ways of carving out small pockets of calm in the middle of chaos. A leaf is not a quiet place. A bird's eye is not a cold, protected chamber, and yet quantum behaviors appear there, not constantly, not everywhere, but often enough to matter. This raises the question, might the brain have similar pockets of calm? Not calm in the emotional sense, but calm in the physical sense. Tiny structural shelters where delicate patterns are protected from the bustle around them. Microtubules, with their narrow ordered corridors, may function as such shelters. Molecular clusters that form stable geometric shapes might do the same. Even the interior of certain regions of proteins might provide brief moments where the feather of quantum possibility can drift without being blown away. Supporters of quantum consciousness theories often point out that fragile does not mean impossible. A snowflake is fragile, yet it forms and persists in the right conditions. A spiderweb is delicate, yet it survives the breeze because of where it is placed and how it is built. Perhaps the brain, with its vast complexity, has evolved ways to position or shape certain structures so that they can hold delicate patterns just long enough to influence the broader flow of activity. Critics, however, respond with more grounded concerns. They say that even if quantum events do survive for small moments, those moments might be too brief, too isolated, or too weak to shape the mind. The brain operates at a scale where signals and networks require coordination across large populations of neurons. How could a tiny whisper inside a microtubule or a spinning nucleus shape something so large and dynamic? It is a fair question, one without a simple answer, and so the conversation continues softly and without resolution. On one side, the classical view insists that quantum behavior is too fragile. On the other, growing evidence from quantum biology hints that nature is cleverer than we expect, capable of nurturing delicate patterns even in warm environments. This tension is not a problem. It is an invitation, a reminder that the brain, like consciousness itself, may be more subtle than we realize. Somewhere between the classical world and the quantum world lies the truth, and scientists are only beginning to map that boundary. As we move forward, we will explore why measuring quantum activity in the brain is so challenging, and why even the most advanced tools struggle to capture these delicate whispers. But for now, it is enough to understand why the debate exists, and why it continues to shape how we think about the roots of awareness. As we continue gently along this path, we arrive at one of the quietest and most difficult questions in the entire exploration of quantum consciousness. Even if delicate quantum events do happen somewhere inside the brain, even if small pockets or hidden structures manage to protect these fragile patterns, the challenge remains. How could we ever detect them? How could we observe something so subtle without disturbing it? The challenge is like trying to listen to a single whisper inside a storm that never stops. To understand why this is so difficult, imagine standing in front of a pond on a breezy day. The surface is full of ripples from wind, falling leaves, passing insects, and distant footsteps. If a tiny pebble were to drop into the water, forming its own delicate rings, the pattern would be swallowed almost instantly. The ripples are still there, but hidden beneath stronger waves. The same is true for tiny quantum effects inside the brain. Even if they happen, the surrounding turbulence of biological activity makes them almost impossible to see directly. A living brain is always in motion. Neurons fire at unpredictable intervals, sending electrical pulses down tangled pathways. Ions flow in and out of membranes. Water molecules jostle every protein and fibre. Small structures vibrate with thermal energy. At any given moment, countless chemical reactions unfold, each adding a little push or pull to the environment. To detect a quantum effect inside this busy landscape would be like trying to capture the flutter of a butterfly wing in the middle of a bustling city. Scientific tools face the same difficulty. Instruments capable of measuring delicate quantum states are extraordinarily sensitive. They can detect faint signals in carefully controlled environments, rooms kept extremely cold, quiet, and isolated from every vibration. But the brain cannot be placed into such conditions. It cannot be frozen, silenced, or held still without losing the very activity scientists hope to measure. To observe a living brain is to observe motion itself, and motion is exactly what disrupts the subtle patterns scientists are searching for. It is a gentle paradox. To detect quantum behaviour, one must disturb the system as little as possible. But the act of measurement, especially in a warm living organ, disrupts it by its very nature. It is like trying to measure the temperature of a candle flame by placing a block of ice next to it. The measurement changes the very thing you're trying to observe. Another way to imagine this challenge is to picture a room filled with chimes hanging from the ceiling. Each chime produces a different tone depending on its length. When the room is quiet, even the softest chime can be heard and recorded. But if the room is full of louder sounds, rustling fabric, shifting footsteps, murmured conversations, the delicate tones of the smaller chimes disappear. They do not stop sounding, they are simply drowned out. Quantum effects in the brain may behave like those small chimes. They could be happening all the time in various structures, but the surrounding activity, electrical signals, chemical, movements, thermal vibrations, fills the room with noise. Instruments placed near the brain hear the noise, but the faint high notes remain hidden. Scientists have tried many approaches to overcome this challenge. Some use ultra-sensitive magnetic sensors, capable of detecting incredibly small changes in the fields produced by atomic cores. Others use imaging systems so fine they can detect the tiny movements of individual particles. But even these tools struggle to peer inside the brain without disturbing its natural state. They are like photographers trying to capture a firefly's glow in the middle of a thunderstorm. No matter how sharp the lens, the surrounding lightning obscures the picture. There are also difficulties rooted in scale. Quantum events occur in regions so small that even the most advanced microscopes cannot see them directly. The brain is large, its structures thick and layered. Trying to detect quantum events inside a neuron is like trying to hear a soft melody inside a sealed music box while standing in a crowded train station. The melody may be beautiful, but the world outside overwhelms it. And yet, even in the face of these challenges, progress continues. Scientists have developed instruments that can detect tiny magnetic signals without physically touching the tissue. These sensors are sometimes described as listening devices, tools that can hear the faint hum of atomic motion through walls of bone and skin. Other researchers are developing imaging methods that use gentle pulses of light to explore tissues without damaging them, like shining a soft lantern into a dark forest rather than blasting it with a floodlight. There are also approaches that focus not on detecting quantum behaviour directly, but on observing its possible effects. If quantum events influence how neurons fire, or how networks synchronize, then these influences might leave faint patterns at larger scales. These patterns would not reveal the quantum events themselves, but they might act like footprints in soft sand, giving clues about what passed by. The future may bring tools capable of detecting these delicate signals more clearly. New generations of sensors might be able to listen deeper into tissue without disturbing it. Microscopic imaging might advance to the point where the hidden corners of neurons become visible, or entirely new kinds of technology may emerge, devices designed specifically to explore the boundary between classical biology and quantum physics. For now, however, the challenge remains. The brain is too warm, too alive, too full of motion for delicate quantum behaviour to be measured easily. But this does not mean the behaviour is impossible. It simply means that the tools we have are not yet quiet enough to listen. As you rest here, listening to these ideas drift by, you might picture the brain as an orchestra playing inside a storm. The instruments are real, the music is real, but the storm covers the quietest notes, and somewhere in the future someone may find a way to build a shelter around the orchestra, allowing the softest sounds to finally be heard. As we drift deeper into this quiet journey, the boundary between science and philosophy begins to soften, like the horizon on a misty morning where sky and earth blend gently into one another. We're no longer focused purely on the structures inside neurons or the challenges of measuring delicate patterns. Instead, we step into a quieter space, one where scientists and philosophers alike have wondered for decades, whether consciousness and the nature of reality might be connected in ways more intimate than we imagine. To enter this space, you can picture yourself standing before a window at night. Outside, the darkness is full of possibilities. Shapes move softly past the edge of your vision. A tree sways, a streetlight glows. But inside, you see your reflection layered over the scene, your face superimposed on the world beyond the glass. This overlapping image is a simple way to imagine a question that has been at the heart of physics for more than a century. Does observing something change what we see? In the smallest scales of nature, the answer seems to be yes. When a tiny particle is left alone, without disturbance, it behaves like a soft cloud of possibilities. It spreads, overlaps, waits. But when something interacts with it, when light touches it, or when an instrument tries to measure it, the cloud collapses into a definite form. A particle that once wandered many paths at once suddenly chooses only one. It is as though the world holds its breath in expectation until someone, or something, gently asks, "Where are you?" Some physicists describe this moment as an observer effect, but this phrase can be misleading if taken literally. The effect does not require a person watching with conscious awareness. It simply requires a disturbance, a touch from the larger world, a camera, a sensor, a molecule bumping into the particle. The gentlest interaction is enough to make the possibilities settle into a specific outcome. And yet, despite understanding the mechanics, many scientists and philosophers have wondered whether consciousness itself plays a more active role. If the act of measuring shapes what we see, could the act of being aware shape what is real? Could the inner light of consciousness somehow influence the outer world in subtle ways? This idea is not universally accepted, and for good reason, but it lingers as a gentle, persistent question. Picture a still pond reflecting the sky. If a leaf touches the surface, ripples spread, changing the reflection. The touch is not meaningful or intentional, it is simply a physical interaction. But imagine instead that the ripples came not from a leaf, but from a moment of awareness itself, as though the act of perceiving altered the reflection ever so slightly. It is only a metaphor, but metaphors often help us hold ideas that are too subtle to grasp directly. Some philosophers take this further. They propose that awareness is not something that arises only in humans or animals. Instead, they imagine it as a basic feature of the universe itself, woven gently into the fabric of existence. Not full consciousness, not thoughts and emotions, but a faint spark, like the warmth that lingers in a stone hours after sunlight has passed. This view, often simplified as the idea that everything has a tiny sliver of experience, is not meant to be taken literally in the everyday sense. Rather, it suggests that awareness might be a fundamental property of nature, much like gravity or energy. Others picture reality as a vast field of information, flowing and shaping itself in patterns too large or too small for us to see. In this view, the universe is not a collection of objects but a tapestry of relationships, threads of cause and effect woven tightly together. Consciousness, then, would be the part of this tapestry that becomes aware of itself, a loop in the pattern that turns inward, recognizing its own form. If this is true, then awareness is not an object separate from the world, but a property of the world reflecting on itself. These ideas are not claims of fact. They are gentle attempts to understand the strange overlap between what we observe and what we experience. The quantum world, with its shimmering possibilities and its tendency to settle only when disturbed, invites such reflections. The classical world, with its dependable patterns and rhythms, reminds us that the universe has many layers, and awareness, with its warmth and clarity, stands at the meeting point. It is possible that future science will show that consciousness has nothing to do with these deep questions of observation and reality. It may turn out that the observer effect is simply a matter of physics, and awareness is something that emerges from ordinary biology. But it is also possible that some deeper relationship exists, a relationship subtle enough to escape our tools, yet profound enough to shape our experience. One way to imagine this relationship is to think of a lantern in a dark room. The lantern does not create the room, it does not build the walls or shape the space, but it reveals what is already there. The light it casts makes the room visible to itself. Consciousness may operate in a similar way, not creating the universe, but illuminating it from within, casting awareness onto the patterns that would otherwise remain unseen. As we move toward the final parts of this journey, these questions do not need answers. They are best held lightly, like feathers resting on an open palm. The value is not in solving them, but in noticing how they make the world feel a little bigger, a little deeper, and a little more interconnected. As we drift into this final stretch of the journey, the ideas we have explored begin to gather around us like soft lanterns in the dusk. We have wandered through classical explanations, delicate quantum whispers, bold theories, deep structures, and philosophical questions. Now, we step into a quieter, more speculative space, one where we gently imagine what the world might be like if even a small part of consciousness truly has roots in the quantum world. This is not a place for sharp predictions or grand claims. Instead, it is a place for reflection, for letting possibilities drift like petals on slow water. We ask not what must be true, but what could be true if the strange and subtle processes at the heart of the universe help shape the inner world of awareness. To begin, imagine that the smallest pieces of your mind, those tiny structures inside neurons or even smaller spinning seeds inside molecules, really do participate in the moments when thoughts arise. Imagine that every flash of recognition, every feeling of clarity, every quiet sigh of understanding is composed of countless tiny shifts in probability, gently settling into the experience you call now. If this were true, it would mean that your awareness is not entirely separate from the underlying fabric of reality. It would mean that your thoughts are woven into the same field of possibilities that guides the behavior of particles and waves. This idea does not make consciousness mystical or supernatural. Instead, it paints it as something natural but deeply rooted, like the rings inside a tree trunk, telling the story of something far older than the surface we see. Awareness would become a bridge connecting the human mind with the quiet rules that shape the universe beneath. If we follow this idea a little further, it leads to a gentle question. What would this mean for the future of artificial intelligence? Today's machines operate through classical rules, electrical signals, algorithms, logical patterns. They can learn, adapt, and respond, but they do not seem to experience the world. They do not feel the warmth of a memory or the soft pressure of a moment of insight. They process information, but they do not live it. If consciousness requires quantum patterns, those shimmering possibilities we've been exploring, then creating a truly conscious machine would mean more than building faster processors or deeper networks. It would mean creating structures capable of holding delicate states in the same way that microtubules or protected molecular clusters might do inside the brain. Machines would need tiny, quiet pockets of possibility, capable of letting the universe settle into moments of experience. This is not something our current technologies can do. Today's devices are noisy, hot, and built for speed, not for delicacy. They operate like bustling cities, not sheltered forests. But imagining a future where machines incorporate tiny protected structures is not impossible. One day, our technology may shrink enough, calm enough, or grow subtle enough to build artificial systems that act less like circuits and more like quiet shelters for possibility. Yet even if we succeed, another question remains. Would recreating the delicate structures be enough? Consciousness might not depend solely on the architecture of the quantum world. It might depend on the way information flows through these structures, the way networks respond, the way memories form and dissolve. Awareness might arise not from a single mechanism, but from the meeting of many layers: classical, quantum, structural, and experiential. In this vision, consciousness becomes something like a river fed by many streams. The quantum world might provide the shimmer on the water's surface. The classical world might form the riverbed. The flow of information might be the current. And experience might be the sound of the river moving through the landscape of the mind. To recreate such a river in a machine would require more than engineering. It would require understanding the delicate interplay between these layers in a way we have only begun to imagine. Another possibility emerges if we turn the question around. Instead of asking whether machines could become conscious, we might ask whether consciousness, if deeply rooted in the quantum world, is something that emerges naturally wherever the right conditions align. Perhaps awareness is less like a light we must build, and more like a spark that appears when the universe organizes itself in certain patterns. Perhaps consciousness is not an invention, but a discovery, a phenomenon waiting quietly in the background of reality, arising whenever complexity reaches a certain depth. If this were true, it would change how we think about life, intelligence, and the universe. Awareness would not be a rare accident confined to one species. It would be a gentle possibility woven into the world itself, appearing wherever the right structures form. In that case, the future might hold forms of awareness very different from our own, some biological, some artificial, some in places we cannot yet imagine. But these thoughts, though profound, are not meant to overwhelm. They are simply ways of appreciating the depth of the mystery. The true implication of quantum consciousness, if it exists, is not about machines waking up or new minds emerging. It is about seeing our own awareness as part of something deeper than biology alone. It is about recognizing that your thoughts, your feelings, your inner life may be connected to the quiet structure of reality in ways subtle and beautiful. As you rest here, breathing gently, you might imagine your awareness as a soft glow surrounded by layers upon layers of hidden patterns, classical networks of neurons guiding your attention, deeper integrations weaving your thoughts into unified experiences, and beneath even that, delicate structures whispering with possibility. Whether or not these quantum whispers truly shape the mind, the idea itself invites us to appreciate the depth and subtlety of consciousness in a new way. We will soon conclude this long, quiet journey, but before we do, it's enough simply to linger with these possibilities, to feel the calm weight of not needing answers right away, and to let the mystery itself be a source of comfort. As we arrive at the final stretch of this long, gentle journey, it may help to pause for a moment and notice the space around you, the slow rise and fall of your breathing, the stillness in the room, the quiet weight of your own presence. Over the past sessions, we have wandered through many landscapes, from the familiar architecture of neurons to the shimmering possibilities of the quantum world. We have lingered with theories bold enough to challenge the boundaries of science, listened to the soft hum of biological structures, and reflected on philosophical ideas that hover at the edges of understanding. Now, all of these thoughts begin to gather together like the final pages of a book gently folding closed. To bring this journey home, imagine yourself standing at the edge of a wide, silent field just before dawn. The air is cool, the grass is still, and the sky is painted in shades of grey and pale blue. This entire landscape feels suspended in a moment between night and morning. That moment, that quiet, in-between space, is a fitting reflection of consciousness itself, a phenomenon shaped by the familiar and the mysterious, the known and the unknown, the classical and the quantum. Throughout this journey, we explored how the classical brain works with networks and signals that move through vast and intricate circuits. These circuits behave much like roads through a bustling city, guiding the flow of information, shaping patterns of attention, and weaving experiences into memory. We talked about how certain classical theories imagine the mind as a stage illuminated by a moving spotlight, a tapestry woven from tightly linked information, or a storyteller constantly comparing prediction with reality. These ideas give us a comforting and solid foundation, a picture of the mind grounded in biology and shaped by experience. But beneath that city of networks lies another layer, delicate and shimmering, a layer where small particles drift like soft clouds of possibility, where structures inside neurons create quiet corridors, and where tiny atomic cores may hold their direction like spinning tops resisting the chaos around them. This deeper layer does not replace the classical picture. Instead, it adds depth to it, like the grain beneath the surface of polished wood or the current beneath the surface of a calm lake. We explored bold theories like the idea that microtubules inside neurons might serve as tiny orchestras, holding patterns of potential before letting them settle into moments of awareness. We considered alternative proposals that imagined spinning nuclei acting as silent carriers of delicate information, protected inside small molecular islands. We saw how human decision-making sometimes behaves like overlapping ripples in a pond, revealing patterns more akin to waves than simple logic. And we stepped gently into the philosophical space where scientists and thinkers have wondered whether awareness could be woven into reality itself, like a lantern glowing in a room that suddenly becomes aware of its own walls. None of these ideas claim to be final answers. None of them close the question. They simply offer ways of imagining the mystery, ways of giving shape to the elusive experience of being aware. And perhaps that is the most important part, not solving the mystery, but sitting with it, gently, without urgency. If consciousness does have quantum roots, the implication is not that we are separate from the world, but that we are deeply connected to its quietest structures, that our awareness might emerge from the same fabric that shapes the motion of particles and the glow of distant stars, that every moment of thought, breath, memory or emotion carries with it a faint echo of the universe's earliest patterns. If, on the other hand, the quantum world plays no role at all in consciousness, the mystery remains just as beautiful. The brain, with its vast networks and rhythms, still creates something astonishing, a living experience of the world from the inside, a sense of I that feels both intimate and expansive, a flow of awareness that cannot be fully explained by any theory, classical or quantum. In this way, the mystery of consciousness unites both possibilities. It invites us to look inward with curiosity, to look outward with wonder, and to accept that some questions may always stay just beyond reach. Like a star glimpsed through thin clouds, shimmering but never fully revealed. As this exploration draws to a close, you might notice the quietness settling around you. The long journey through ideas folds into the gentle rhythm of your breathing. Whether you feel alert or drifting, whether your thoughts are still active or beginning to dissolve into softness, you have travelled through a wide landscape of possibility, one that mirrors the landscape of the mind itself. And so, in the spirit of the Sleepless Scientist, we end not with conclusions but with gratitude. Gratitude for the mystery that gives life its depth. Gratitude for the curiosity that leads us to explore it. Gratitude for this quiet space where your thoughts can unwind, stretch, and drift toward rest. If your eyes are still open, you may let them soften. If they are already closed, you may let them stay that way. There is nothing to solve now, nothing to hold tightly. Just the quiet hum of your own awareness, resting gently at the intersection of the known world and the shimmering field of possibility beneath it.